All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order at 7:19. At this time, is there any public comment? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody. We have nobody here. And we're adding that item to the consent agenda, D, to approve the hiring of Beth George as Director of Student Support Services. All right, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? So moved, Chris. Yes. All right. Is there a second? Second, Bailey. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda with the item added, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, motion passes. Okay, so next under executive limitations monitoring. We haven't to accept the monitoring report for 2.4 financial planning. Is there somebody willing to make that motion? Oh, yep. I'll second. Chris. All right. Discussion. Discussion. Kevin.
There's a recognition about which sections is like item 1 or something with the handling of the finances regarding the lobby rearrangement. And I don't want to make a big deal of it, but I think it's a serious action. And I think it was kind of glossed over in the report. In the world of private enterprise, you know, people move on for doing things like that. So hopefully we don't end up in a situation like that. But I think it's been handled lightly, and I think that the impact is way more severe than what we anticipated.
What else? And I'll attach that worksheet you sent me to this response form.
Okay.
All right. Any comments or questions? Does anyone have any comments or questions they want captured on the response form? Kevin's will be attached with his worksheet. Yes,
I guess just related to Kevin's, I would be curious. I only got a chance to skim this, I might have missed it. If there is make sure there's a plan in place so that if something like this is going down that track again, that maybe we can be better apprised along the way. Even though it sounds like there wasn't a lot we could do to change it, at least we would be aware.
Yeah, in the report, I mentioned that the plan going forward should be, what we should have done in retrospect was even though we didn't know exactly what the amount was going to be, that we got a not to exceed amount, sort of like the action that we're taking now, before moving forward when we knew it exceeded the budgeted amount and was going to need to dip into the capital reserve.
And I've been lukewarm about finance committee, but I don't know, and I've been lukewarm because there's a balance between when you get in the weeds and when you don't, and all that kind of stuff. But I'm wondering if we had a robust finance committee, if that would have been enough of a check, or it would have been a check to really step back. And I mean, this whole thing was for the benefit of making this building better. I mean, the whole project is not what the issue is. It's just a matter of the process. Yeah. So, I mean, that's something, I guess, to think about as far as the finance committee is concerned.
And I've been thinking along those lines with the facilities work group. I think that could serve a similar purpose in thinking about that process.
Any other questions or comments? All right, and I'm gonna ask you your two questions. Based on the information provided, does the board find that the superintendent's interpretation is reasonable? Yes?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brad. Based on the information provided, does the board find that the data demonstrates accomplishment of this interpretation? Yes?
Yeah.
All right. All those in favor of accepting the monitoring report for 2.4 financial planning, please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so that one passes. Okay, next item is an action item to approve the updated procedure for the use of security cameras to include school buses. And I think I noted in the chair notes that typically a procedure is the work of the superintendent, but taking this action as a board kind of puts it out there so that everybody will know that there's been a change, actually. Yeah, that there has been a change.
And I'll just speak to this briefly. There's unless you want to.
Yeah, if
Motion
there's
first.
a motion to approve the updated.
So moved.
Second. Sarah.
I moved it, Krista.
Sarah, second.
So we've had this procedure in place for a little while. We added security cameras several years ago now. In the creation of a new bus contract and even in conversations with our current vendor, there's been talk about security cameras on buses. We've had some incidents where it would have been useful to have cameras there. So in talking with legal, the advice was if we're going to be putting cameras on buses, let's make sure that we have the right procedures and things in place. So this makes it very clear that the language for our use of security cameras now includes cameras that might be on buses. We don't currently have any cameras on buses, but it's something we likely will want in the future.
Oh, sorry,
Please.
sorry. And in the past, we've had some good conversations about security cameras and their uses in schools and the boundaries around that, and kind of got dug in a little bit. And so I assume the security cameras on the buses would have similar kinds of use and restrictions.
Exactly the same. That was the intent behind inserting "and school bus," basically is the language that's inserted into the policy. So all the other ways in which we use footage would apply to the footage we'd have on the school buses.
So that might be helpful for our community to, if they have an awareness or have had a conversation with us before about security cameras, that we could just say exactly that. So,
And for what it's worth, in the time that we've had the security cameras, there hasn't been a single complaint about their use and how we've been using them. So I think it has been a real value add from a safety and security perspective. And there hasn't been an express concern with an alternative perspective.
Krista?
The only thing I saw that was in addition to the language about buses was in letter I, which included contracted law enforcement officials. Can you just speak to the addition of that and if that is anywhere in any of our other policies, the law enforcement officials piece?
I'd have to look and see where they are, if that exists in any other policies. But I think the authorized officials piece was pretty broad. We wanted to make explicit that in the event that there's a situation that we're requesting law enforcement support with, that people know that we may be working with law enforcement to share footage and kind of use that to protect Mount Aid property and Mount Aid students, and to the extent that it's useful for the greater community, you know, we want to partner with our local resources. This just makes that explicit.
Daily. Is the plan for security cameras on the buses to be focused on that inside? Or would there be any on that outside, like people who are passing school buses?
We haven't gotten into that level of detail yet, because we haven't actually gotten to the stage of putting them on. I've been envisioning this whole time, the camera up in the front that kind of shows, and you know, the interior of the bus. Having said that, I haven't brushed up on what's current practice in cameras on buses, so we probably want to take a look at that best practice.
Anyone else?
Just a grammar piece, letter C. Let's not double the S if we're not gonna double it on all the others.
I love that.
I saw the same. It's all about it, you know, don't double it, but you know.
All right. And I'm not seeing any more comments or questions, so. All those in favor of approving the updated procedure for use of security cameras to be, to include school buses with one S. Please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Next is the update on the financial report, which was included in the packet. Did anybody bring any questions?
Where's Steve?
Yeah.
Everybody's.
Did he phone any in?
Okay. Not hearing it. Assume all is well then. All right, down to board management and governance. An action item to accept the monitoring report for 4.2 board job description.
I'll make the motion, Chris.
I'll second, Kristen.
All right, any discussion?
This is
Sarah.
a random thing, but in the second line of the whole thing, it says the community of the 5-town area, and I'm just curious if that is an adjustment we're able to make, or would we need it to, you have to repost the policy for an interpretation?
Yeah.
So if we had I'll echo Kevin's comment, if we then had a policy governance committee, we might actually go back through and fix
Update all of that.
some of those problems. Okay.
It's gonna be time going.
Mm.
Likewise with the articles of agreement to
Right.
update those.
Can I ask a
Sure.
little rabbit hole question? I don't want. I'm just thinking about like all the letterhead and everything. Is all of that changing July 1st? Or like how's that gonna work?
Yeah, so the approach we've taken so far has been, if there's a communication that's specific to next year, then we're taking Lincoln off of the letterhead. If it's a communication related to this year, because we're still serving Lincoln students K-12, we've kept them on. Even though technically they're currently not part of MAUSD, it feels appropriate for this year to keep them on the letterhead.
All right, so your two questions, based on the information provided, does the board find that the board's interpretation is reasonable? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, and does the board find that the data demonstrates accomplishment of this interpretation? Yes?
Yep.
Alright. All those in favor of accepting the monitoring report for 4.2 board job description, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Okay, so we're gonna move down to An action item to approve for posting the admission of non-resident tuition students.
I'll make the motion, Chris.
Chris? Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Here. Any discussion?
So what are the cliff notes between B and C?
Yeah.
I'm looking at a different screen right now, but between what we currently have and what this new policy is. So the procedure, which is what we have now for admission of non-resident students, says that MAUSD believes that its primary responsibility is to the resident children of the district. Thus, tuition students are not accepted except under the following conditions. Superintendent can make a recommendation of a non-resident student or the resident students who begin any given school year and become non-residents. In all cases, tuition charges shall be waived for non-resident students except at the beginning, blah, blah, blah. So basically, the disposition in the current procedure is we do not accept tuition students. I think we probably want to change that in light of Lincoln's. And so the policy that I've brought before you tonight is verbatim the model policy from VSBA on tuition for non-resident students. And it's what other districts in the area have for their policy around non-resident students. Specifically, tuition paying non-resident students. And we're in the process right now of working out all the finer details of what that process looks like for Lincoln students to register. And the process that we'll use to then bill Lincoln and when we'll bill them and all of that. So that's nearly finished for this year. We're probably going to make some changes next year, including the timeline, and a little bit more of a digital kind of feel, but we're getting that mapped out now.
Sarah?
This is if you have a student that is tuitioned in and then either ends up, is either like, well, I have two parts to this question. Ends up being very expensive, let's say, is that then on our school district to pay for that expense, or is there money that typically travels from the state with that student if it's?
It wouldn't be from it wouldn't really be from the state, unless it was sort of from the state to Lincoln to us.
Okay.
So we do, part of the challenge will be for students who have who receive services beyond what we would consider the services that the tuition provides.
Right,
We can bill for those additional expenses.
okay,
Typically, that's for students on IEPs, but it's not exclusive to students on IEPs or 504s. We can, to the best of our ability, true up what the cost is. And that's really the process. So we have an announced tuition rate that we have to set. That ultimately ends up not really being the tuition. The actual real expense is trued up at the end of the year with receiving districts.
my second part to this question is if a student has a behavior problem that cannot be solved within the district. Is that in here to then say this isn't working and then Lincoln needs to find a different placement for this student, or are we on the hook for every single one of their students that can't find somewhere to be? So
that falls more or less in the same category as the prior conversation, like that through the processes that exist, whether it's a 504 IEP, whatever that process is, the teams that come together make the determination that the student needs additional support, either in district or out of district. That decision's made, and the real costs for that are the responsibility of the Lincoln School District.
So
And that-
spelling.
That gets factored in.
Okay.
That's part of the truing up. We don't always know that at the start of the year.
Okay.
That may happen over the course of the year, and then again, that gets trued up.
Okay.
Exactly whom from Lincoln sits in those meetings and is part of those conversations. Something we'll need to be thinking about, be really clear. They'll have, by law, they have to have a director of special education. Perhaps that person would sit in on placement decision meetings, things like that, that will have costs associated with that. I guess we have to really unpack who the LEA, so the lead education agency, is on this, if it would be Lincoln School District, since ultimately it's their dollars. or if it's MAUSD. These are some of the details that we're gonna have to figure out going forward.
I think I heard the answer in here somewhere, but if we had done, if MAUSD identified a program, let's say, or an action or and Lincoln can agree with that, let's see, and can they not agree with it? And then can they also, if something is done, not pay for it, because they don't agree with it, or what's the?
Then it gets really messy. I don't know exactly what the solution there is. I think that comes back to that other question about who's at the table and who's the LEA. If Lincoln's the LEA, they ultimately get to be the ones that make the decision. And which in a way makes sense for me that they'd have some LEA responsibilities since it's their dollars that are going to be covering those costs. And yet they're not the ones delivering the services. So clearly MAUSD has a role in this, right? So we'll have to figure out exactly what that relationship needs to be, because Lincoln has a financial interest and MAUSD has sort of a meeting the students' needs interest, in particular when those needs may be disruptive to others.
And there could be a conflict because Lincoln says, we don't think this student needs that, and the district is saying we need to do that to support. Or law, legal, procedural, or, you know.
And that's not unprecedented. In the end, when there's a conflict, the LEA makes the decision. And then others can respond to that decision through legal matters or whatever it might be, but the LEA is the decision maker. That's why being really clear about who the LEA is.
And then you wouldn't be required. You would be required to provide the service to the level the LEA determines, not necessarily the level that you believe, the district believes is necessary for the well-being of that student.
Potentially.
Bailey? Is there, we were talking a lot about Lincoln MAUSD, but technically this policy could be for any school in, or any student from any school, right? And then is there a minimum age? Typically, I think of like high school students, but if there was a family from a town that wanted their student to be in a larger elementary school or have something that we offer, could they tuition an elementary school age student, and would they get to choose what school they went to?
I think that's how it works in other districts,
Okay.
that a parent could choose. And even, you know, as we've contemplated tuition waivers, for a tuition waiver that the board denies, it has always been sort of an option for the parents to consider paying tuition to the school they want their child to go to if the tuition waiver is there. So I think it would apply the same way to the elementary schools. The cost is different, right? So we announced 2 different tuition rates, but otherwise the process would apply.
I don't know if that's similar to what Bailey was saying, but I was thinking about how we offer seats to students from other districts already, right? That are not residents. So don't we already have a process in place? Like if a student decides to come here from Middlebury and ends up needing different services, wouldn't we model that same process? No. Why?
So it's a different process. So that's the high school choice.
Oh.
So
it has
there
a
are
whole
no
different-
dollars that follow.
I see.
that.
Okay. Yeah, if I could just say one other thing was that, what you were making me think of, Bailey, also is, that we're sort of queued up to have a conversation at some point about school choice, and that might relate back to, your comment.
Yes, I remember, when I would love to have this conversation, but,
You've been so patient.
it's kind of, you know, but, I just wanted, I was thinking more about what Kevin said, and I remember being a really active listener to the legislature last year. I was all in, and it was really, really clear that the district is responsible for those costs, right? Like their LEA. They did make it really clear. What got tricky was like for us, what was the money gonna be sent if the challenge was at Moncton or Bristol or whatever? Would the money be sent directly to Moncton or Bristol, or would it go to the district to then be spent? But since they're only one town and one school, that they would be responsible for those costs. The other side of the conversation that was complicated and not clear was which taxpayers were actually funding that anyways, right? So was the tax going to go up in that town or district specifically, or was it going to come from like a different fund that was actually funded statewide versus specifically applied to that town anyway? So so like I would say the more complicated part is kind of on the other side of that. Like, my general understanding is that we're kind of paying it anyways. Like as a state, we pay for our, even though obviously not in every situation, because we do have some specific stuff in our budget, but to some extent, there's that state funding is kind of coming from everyone, regardless of what town the state was in.
Yeah, we do have a statewide funding mechanism in education in Vermont. That is true. So like when like the $200 million bond in Burlington, right, to build a new building or whatever that ends up being. In a way, everyone in the state shares in that because it comes from the education reserve and it has an impact on the yield, which has an impact on the tax rate, which is how everybody pays for it. In this particular case, MAUSD is going to get a very defined dollar amount from the state for special education. That's the block grant with 173, as will Lincoln. With the exception of extraordinary costs, what we do to provide services to students isn't going to change that amount that we get. Likewise, whatever Lincoln decides for services for students isn't going to change the amount that they get. So there is a different kind of financial impact than there has been historically because it's not a reimbursement model anymore. There's no question in my mind that Lincoln is going to be responsible for the dollars. The question is who's responsible for the decision making then, because there's a shared interest in the decision making. One's financial, one's from let's meet the students' needs, because we're charged with meeting the students' needs, even though they're a Lincoln resident, but they're attending school here. And so that sort of dance is something that I don't have very clear in my mind yet.
Brad.
Yeah, well, on that last point, there's also a third actor, and that's parents, in terms of whether a program is meeting a child's needs, and that's unpredictable at this point for any particular student. But I had one other question, Patrick. Could you just sort of outline the process by which the Lincoln students will be registering or are registering?
Sure. What we're doing this year, and I have an email that I've drafted to send to the Lincoln School Board to fill them in, but it hasn't gone out yet. But essentially what it will be this year is a PDF, a fillable PDF that we would email to the current families that have a grades 6 through 11 student in Lincoln. So that would be next year's grades 7 through 12. And essentially it articulates, just to be really clear, like, so as of May 18th, Lincoln is no longer a member district in MAUSD. And because they're no longer a member district, that means Lincoln families have to, and because the Lincoln School District decided to be a choice for grades 7-12, families in Lincoln now have to choose which school they're going to send their kid to. And they're going to have to enroll their kid in the school of their choice. It goes on to say, we have been, had the pleasure at Mount Abe in serving Lincoln students for a really long time. We'd like to continue to be able to do so. And if you choose to register your child at Mount Abe, here's what you need to do. And all we're asking for right now is with this fillable PDF form for them to type their name in as the parent or guardian, type in the name of the student or students that they are wishing to have attend Mount Abe. They're going to check a box that says, I wish to attend, or I wish not to have my student enroll. So we don't want to be in a position where we didn't receive something from someone, but we don't know if they just forgot or if they're choosing not to enroll. So we want to hear from everyone. And then there's an electronic signature on this form that we feel we need to have sort of the confidence to move forward with this set of students. So later in the spring, we'll work with that list and start the process of enrolling students. Later on in the spring, we will actually send to those families that say they want to enroll their student the information we have on a file for their student. Families can then verify that information, say, yes, that's our address, yes, it's still our health insurance, or whatever those forms are. And then knowing that things can change and move some over the course of the summer, by August 1st, whatever list we have at that point is the list we're going to be using to bill the Lincoln School District. So we are going to bill, ideally receive funds prior to the first day of school in late August. So we'll send a bill right now thinking August 1st for the number of students times the tuition rate and whatever other calculations. We'll know some of the students and some of their needs, and we can approximate what the cost is. So we'll build that in. We'd get half of the payment in August and the other half, I think we're saying in December. Lloyd?
Yep.
Yeah. And being really clear with the Lincoln School Board, students that enroll at Mount Abe for the start of the school year, we are going to bill Lincoln School District for the entire school year, even if they leave on day 3, because we have to ensure we have enough staffing. We don't make daily or weekly commitments to staffing. We make annual commitments to staffing with contracts. So we have sort of an expense that we're laying out. We need to ensure that we're covering those expenses to serve those students. So if a family chooses to leave in January, we're still going to collect the full year from Lincoln School District, and whether Lincoln School District covers expenses for them to go somewhere else or not is between the family and Lincoln School District. But we need to make sure that our costs associated with that are covered.
Is there a memorandum of understanding in that regard?
There isn't at this time. I suspect that's likely going to be an outcome. I still need to work more with Dina on what needs to be in place legally, but that's the direction that we're.
I mean, I think, Lincoln needs to know that if a kid is only there for a month, that they're on the hook for the whole year. So, and I think we should agree to that before we start taking a bunch of kids.
Yep.
One other question in my mind, based on what you said, how is the registration process and the timeline? How is that coordinated with sort of the curriculum decisions? Because I know that kids now at Mount Abe are making selections for their coursework next year. How's that going to work?
So what we're doing for this year is students that it really applies mostly to high school students. There's less course selection that happens at the middle level, although there is a little bit.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So we are allowing high school students to engage in the process with all the other students and select their courses and kind of go through that process. So in the end, we don't want Lincoln students disadvantaged because of the hiccups in this withdrawal.
Right.
They're engaged in that now. And if they have to make a change because they're going to end up not coming to Mount Abe, that's expected to be a relatively small number of students, and we'll kind of handle that on a case by case.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks.
Ben, is there any, I guess I'm just really concerned about families and students who do not have transportation to any school. And so is there going to be busing from us, from like Lincoln to Mount Abe, or is that Lincoln's responsibility? How's that?
Lincoln has built into their budget busing for students to Mount Abe, and they've communicated to Lincoln families saying, we're providing busing to Mount Abe. If you want your child to go to a different school, then transportation is the family's responsibility.
Okay.
Would students who are currently enrolled at Mount Abe as a Lincoln resident, would Lincoln have to pay for them as well? Or just for this foreseeable future?
Yeah, so for this year, we've already collected taxes from the town of Lincoln. So MAUSD collected those taxes to cover the cost for Lincoln students. Next year, the Lincoln School District will be collecting taxes from Lincoln taxpayers. And we will be sending a bill to the Lincoln School District for the students that come to Lincoln. So each student that comes to Mount Abe, there'll be a tuition fee And in addition to that tuition fee, there may be additional costs if they, have other needs that need to be met, that cost additional money.
So Lincoln would have to pay for the student currently going to Mount Abe this year,
Not this year,
for the next year.
but next year, right, each student, including the kids that are here this year and stay next year, we bill for each of those.
Just they are paying for them this year through the,
Yeah.
Through their taxes.
Right, no, yes,
not great, yeah.
yeah.
All right, any other questions? Sarah?
I assume that this would be a Lincoln probably issue versus our issue, but like a family, like they have two families, one is in Lincoln, one is in a different town, so they feel like they have a lot of options. Or like, is there cross-checking for at least, I don't know if there just should be communication to the general group that this is happening, and so like I would be like, well, that doesn't apply to me, but it might apply to somebody, I don't know. Or is that a
I'm
Lincoln
not sure I understand that
communication?
question. Where my mind is going is residency.
Right,
Um,
where are you claiming your,
right. So that can be tricky sometimes.
but it's.
We have a registrar at Mount Abe whose job is to check residency. Presumably Lincoln will have someone whose responsibility is to check residency. It isn't if we, and that's part of the thing. So if we're sending a list, in August, we're gonna send a list to Lincoln and say, these are the students
Mhm.
from Lincoln who intend to enroll at Mount Abe. This is what we're gonna bill you for at $20,000 a kid or whatever it is. We aren't the responsible party to confirm their residency in Lincoln. I suspect Lincoln, if I were Lincoln, I would want to confirm residency of that list of kids before I sent payment for them.
What about the student who moves partway through the year to Lincoln? Is that part of, that's
Yeah.
all in this plan?
So in that case, any student that shows up late to the school year they'd be billed tuition on a prorated basis.
Gotcha.
So same if somebody moved from Lincoln to Waitsfield, they're no longer in that number, they would be prorated.
Right. Here's where the trick comes in, and this is where the memorandum of understanding that Brad mentioned becomes important. If our belief is that we're gonna collect on that student for the year, even if they move to Richmond in January. Who's paying Richmond for the second half of the year? If they attend there.
Hmm. So if they still,
Well, if they move to Richmond,
if they move to Richmond, then.
then
Oh, right, if they
get-
move-
Right, if they move, that's what I'm thinking. If
Right,
they,
so
if
if they
somebody
move to
moves
Richmond,
out
they're
of
resident
Lincoln,
there, and right, yes.
but if they switch schools.
Right.
Then that, yeah.
And really residency, effectively, it boils down to where does the child lay their head at night?
Mhm.
The idea that, a family can purchase land in a town and pay taxes in that town, and that grants them access to that school system, doesn't really work that way. People try that and they probably get away with it from time to time or for a period of time until the registrar checks and like somehow finds out you're not actually living there. And then it's messy again and it gets corrected somehow.
I do have one more question. In some of the schools I work with, we're dealing with a large homeless population. And so I was curious how that plays into account, like, because I know like. If their last legal residence was Richmond, but they're couch surfing in Starksboro, then Richmond is responsible for educating them and providing transportation. So is there any sort of thought process on kids that might be in that situation now with this kind of trickiness?
Yeah, so they're protected under the McKinney-Vento Act in that case, in that basically they can attend whatever school makes sense for them. And then there's a cost sharing that happens with maybe the town where they reside, but the school that they attend and yeah, so that's pretty well spelled out. That happens right now. And so we would apply it the same way for kids at Lincoln.
Mhm.
And that really only applies to a student who's, where the relationship is between MAUSD and Lincoln. If it's between Lincoln and another district, we're sort of out of the loop at that
Mhm.
point.
Anyone else?
Mhm.
All right. All right, then, all those in favor of approving for posting the admissions of non-resident tuition students, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Abstentions, all right, so that passes. The next item is to delete the procedure for admission of non-resident students, because now we're gonna have a policy, so.
So moved.
Second, Aaron. Any discussion? All right. Seeing any? All those in favor of deleting the procedure for admission of non-resident students, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next is an update from the Community Engagement Committee. So Krista.
Yeah, I don't,
Aaron?
I feel like we gave an update at the last meeting, and so when this agenda went out, I realized after the fact that.
Okay.
You know, I don't know what to talk about right now.
Yeah, okay. All right. Okay, well then, moving down to the big discussion of the night, board reorganization. Yeah.
What's going on?
Do you want us here?
So
Sorry about the chocolate?
typically, what happens is
Needs to prep.
there's, you know, you just kind of go to that meeting and you're not sure what's gonna happen or who's gonna. So this was an opportunity to have a discussion before the reorganizational meeting on the 14th, I think, that you're having, so.
No, she said.
How did that feel, right?
That you'll all be, that I won't be.
So, I don't know where you want to take it. That's one piece of it. There are several pieces, and I think if we just work through a little at a time, we can get through the whole discussion rather than try to go to everybody's at once. Sarah.
I just want to clarify before we do that. Not Chris, not Don. Up for election, Kristen. Aaron up for, not, are you running?
No,
Okay,
I'm good.
you're good. Liz,
I'm up next
you are up from a glitch.
Yes.
thing?
Yeah,
Okay,
Aaron
I'll have
has
the
the
same
same
glitch
glitch
next year.
for
Okay.
next year. Yep.
okay.
Yeah.
You're here,
So monk.
you're here.
Yep.
I'm here, okay.
Steve's
And
still here.
Steve is still here,
And Brad?
and Brad. Is anyone
Yeah, sure.
running for Chris's? Are any of these,
There are people on the ballot.
there's people on the ballot for Chris's. Is there anyone running against Krista?
No, there isn't anybody in the back for Chris.
Well, then it's a write-in.
All right, I think.
It's a write-in,
Yeah.
okay.
There's a-
And-
Open slot in Bristol, right?
Yes.
And in New Haven, and
And
two
there's
in
two in
Moncton.
Moncton.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have some problems. Okay,
So, at that reorganization meeting, I think you might want to get word to your clerk to get in touch with the towns with openings. And see if the select board might help you identify some people to reach out to. Maybe be a little more strategic about it rather than, you know,
Mhm.
wait for somebody to pop a letter of interest out. Maybe you tap somebody. That will help.
so do we want to start at the beginning, which is what happens at the beginning of that reorganizational meeting,
Yes.
which is that Patrick
Opens the
speaks,
meeting.
opens the meeting?
Yep.
Yep.
And then we have to, then we nominate a chair.
Yes.
And Don was just alluding to the fact that in years past, it's been,
Don't really know what's going to happen.
right, there aren't many discussions
Discussions.
about that.
Right.
So we thought it would be helpful to have some conversations about sustainability and about what people are thinking. And I had the chance to talk a bit with Dawn. She was gracious enough to spend some time with me just talking in general about, you know, what's it been like to be the board chair? What have the challenges been? What has worked well? What, you know, do you think you wish you knew when you stepped into this role, which was great. And then sort of what I think, how could we have a conversation with the group about making both that role, but board work in general kind of sustainable, because it has been challenging. I think, and I don't know if you would agree, that having a vice chair and the way that, we've done those two roles in the past few years has been really helpful. And I don't know, prior to when I kind of budged my way into helping more, what it was like, but what we do now is the vice chair is really involved in planning agendas, meeting with the superintendent to do that. Pitching in where there's a need, kind of helping to carry the load, being a sounding board. Just being another person to offer perspective and support, which I think has been.
Well, I also think that, just because we're facing so many different challenges on so many different fronts, it's more than a one-person job. So I agree with you, Krista.
Yeah. And so I also just wanted to share, so I am running for a 1-year term. I had a glitch, as did Aaron, and I'm committed for 1 year, and I think I'll be done after that. I spoke to Don and Patrick and said I'd be interested in serving as chair for the next year if we're interested in having me in that role. But that it's a transition year and that it would be a time to identify somebody as a vice chair who would be in that role, knowing that they would then be transitioning into the chair role. Aaron has expressed interest in that role. But of course, we look to this group to say if they like that idea or if other people want to step forward. And Aaron and Don can chime in as well, but I think the idea as far as long-term sustainability is to create a more deliberate process where you have a chair and a vice chair, the vice chair knowing that they're going to be then taking over that role in a particular amount of time. You might decide to put a term limit on that time, just to be more clear about preserving someone's sanity, capacity, ability, and all of that.
So there is some interesting aspects to that. I mean, obviously, Don has held that position for, what do we say, 12 years or
Yeah.
whatever. So I mean, it becomes, there's expertise that's developed.
Yeah.
There's knowledge of protocol that's
Yeah.
developed. I mean, there's a lot of advantages to that.
Yeah.
But you also get into maybe a comfortable position, if you will. The town of Bristol Select Board rotates on an annual basis, which seems like who's gonna develop some expertise, but I think it brings them, it may very well bring them together, knowing that
You're going to be in that
you're
role.
you're in a loop, you know?
It's coming. Yeah.
And that's an interesting concept. The planning commission, Bristol Planning Commission, you can't, has a term limit, 3 years. And then you have to be off for at least a year before being reconsidered
On the whole commission or just as the chair?
as a chair.
As the chair, yeah.
Yeah, terms on the planning commission can go forever, but as far as being the chair.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different ways with different pros and cons to look at that. How that all works.
So if you're gonna, I would offer that if you're going to put some term, put it in your policy. Because then it's just there, it's how you operate, it doesn't flip flop depending on the person, it's just. You've addressed it from the beginning, looking forward, this is how we're gonna be, how we're gonna act or behave. And then none of that other stuff enters in. Oh man, that was a bad choice, we're not doing that one again, you don't, you've already established it.
I would just say I appreciate everything you've done. And I appreciate Krista and Aaron for being willing to step up. very, very much so. A year is a year, and that's already a lot, right? So-
Well, it's funny because as I was calculating Dawn's service, I was like looking back, I've been on the board 8 years.
Yeah.
It's not, so
So to pull
it's
that,
been a little bit.
that chair role, yeah, I mean, so it's been to give that stability and to offer that for the training and the moving forward is amazing. You know, and I'm so glad that you've been working closely with Dawn. And that you've taken such a leadership role anyways, already among us, whether it's chairing committees or bringing up conversations, being thoughtful, making sure everyone's voice is heard, right? Like getting our community engagement stuff together, working with Sue McCormick, like you very much have done a lot of leadership for us, so. I'm excited that you're willing to offer to be chair. And Erin. Yeah, yes, right? Well, that's great. And then it's just, you know, from you, Dawn, what can we do? What would be helpful? You know, like. I realize that there are certain things that will just be what they are. But with our communication plan, like that you've been focused on, you know, questions answering process or a hierarchy to send people like. Would be a great question for your principal or, right, like some sort of like, I'm excited about moving forward with what you've been doing for us for that communication plan. And hopefully that would take some weight because I feel like if you were to kind of give us a rundown of the load of the workload, it would be interesting to hear kind of like, what does this look like for you? Because I think I imagine it, I don't really know. So. And maybe it varies, right? Ebbs and flows.
It
but-
does vary. You know, sort of like. Just put your email and, okay, this is what kind of day we're having today. And then you go like this. Yes. Brad has his hand up.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that, you know, obviously we've been fortunate to have an above average person on the board, as the board chair for the last 8 or so years. But for the average person, you know, serving as board chair for 8 years really isn't sustainable. So, I mean, I think that having, you know, term limits, or at least nominal term limits is a good idea. And in the policy, it doesn't have to be absolute. You can say that the term limit is, say, 3 years, you know, for board chair. But upon vote of the board, you can extend it to give you a little bit of, you know, wiggle room if somebody has been a great board chair and is willing to do it for another year or two, for, you know, to keep the momentum going. Otherwise, support the ongoing activities of the board. You can do that. You write it into the policy.
Yeah. I wonder if maybe we would want to have at the reorganization meeting, someone maybe wants to make a proposal for what it could look like, or maybe we could come with a couple of different options and just decide what we want to do.
Well, I mean, you know, I represent a lot of nonprofits that, you know, have boards, and I could probably dig up some language to put out there.
That would be great.
It would have to be, you know, tweaked, and Dina would have to look at it and everything, but at least get a sense of how other organizations, you know, deal with term limits.
And it seems like, you know, at least in my mind, that it would be great to be able to, you know, we have a sort of a new start at the reorg meeting, so that as much as we can kind of take action on and set forth at that meeting for how we're going to operate, at least over the next year, would be really helpful. So maybe if, Brad, you have that language that you can send along, and we can put that on the agenda as an action item, and we can decide what, you know, we can decide not to adopt it if we don't want to, but to set that intention that we're starting off with a plan like that in place. Yeah.
Sarah?
With that fresh start experience that you're referring to, do we want to try to have a plan in place to I'm gonna rephrase this. I know on other boards, they also commit to like their kind of their focus or their committee or subcommittee or their working group or whatever that they're part of, and that is often during their second meeting. And I don't know if we want to attempt to try that for a year and see how it goes and see if that gives people the right amount to take on and also bring back, like, I mean, I'm imagining the carousel or the Zoom kind of meeting for a sub meeting. That's either before or after, like 6 to 7 or 7 to 8, like, and really trying to structure that second meeting to being pretty prompt and pretty rigid with time as much as possible. I think that would help with sustainability. I have found that part really, I looked back at our old, for my relicensure, I was like, oh, I wonder what I've done in the past 5 years, for what learning have I done in education? And I was like, yeah, well, this was learning. And I started going back and looking, and I was like, oh my gosh, we would start and we ended at 8:30. We ended at 6, and I'm like looking at our original meetings, and I'm like, we were pretty quick, and I don't know what happened, but we got longer, and it would be great if we could figure out, I think that would help with sustainability. That and the energy of, so committees, and if we want to reorganize that, and just our role in the community. I don't know if it's the communication pathway that people come to us. And so we're always feel like on the defensive, and energetically that is not sustainable. And so I don't know how we can redirect the communication pathway within the system. And I'm accurate in that, but it's just I like being
This woman,
informed.
all she does is show. We're muted.
Fred, your mic's on.
I think
What?
Patrick, I mean,
What? Oh, sorry.
Anyway, those are my thoughts on sustainability and how we can feel better about our role. And want to do it, not exhausted.
on the committee piece, so we have on the reorganization meeting already set, we have Phil Gore from the VSBA coming to do like sort of a board member 101 orientation with the group. And then we have, and that's it's for 45 minutes. So depending on when we start, after we reorganize. But then right after that, we have Jeannie Collins to talk about committees. And when we talked to her about what we were looking for, and we said we want 1 hour, and we said we'd really love to have some general info, but then get to like, what are some options? And I think we talked about putting an action item on there to form committees, so that if we felt we were ready to do that, we could, to your point. And included in those options, I think she's going to talk us through is like carousel being one possibility. So again, with the idea of like setting our intention. And one of the things we usually do during the reorg meeting is, I'm looking to you because I think this is right, but you'll tell me if it's not, that we also say what committees, if any, we're going to be part of. Right. So it all sort of makes sense to do it then. So.
And maybe including in that negotiations, because that's going to come, so if people are sharing the load, you'll have to think about that.
Support staff negotiate next year,
Just support.
just support staff.
So. All right.
But that is something we talked about in terms of sustainability, and I do think that will help. with many things. Including transparency, including less burden on just the chair. Community perception and in potential involvement, so. I think those are valid points.
I also, sorry. I really appreciate the Friday reports. I don't know where those are going. If those are for just us or if that's a public thing, and I didn't. So I wanted to ask about that, but I think that. Display is really strong PR and is helpful. And I get something like that from that. I think it gets forward to me as a stakeholder in a different district. From the superintendent that goes, I think, to the owners or the parents or somebody. And I appreciated getting that here too.
The intent with that right now, and we can certainly make it whatever will work for us. But kind of modeling after the career center example that Steve brought. Weekly messages to the board, and then once a month, it's an item on the agenda that is sort of the accumulation of those weeklies. And that then is a more public document.
Okay, cool.
And I think we put it on not the reorganization meeting, but the next meeting in March to talk about
How to use it.
how to use it. Because I agree, we made reference of it in the column that went out on the AD. To the most recent one, but I think there is a lot of potential there.
And it's still in its infancy, but the structure to create the content is established now, and it will build a routine.
Right.
And so we can then pretty easily adapt how we want that to get distributed, so.
Yeah, I think they're great. They're the perspective's good. You know, it's a little bit visual with them. And I think it's important that monthly roll-up, that it goes further than just become a public document through a board meeting. And there's nothing to say, having experienced this process in a lot of different levels, there's nothing to say that it doesn't get editorialized to some degree to make it readable. You know, I'm sure people don't have the attention span to read 6 pages, but if it's congested down into 1 or 2 pages, you know, and that's the document that goes out broadly.
Therein lies the challenge.
Well, Jennifer, you got a new job, you know? I mean, in the old country, the GM's admin did it. Everybody, and all went to her and she, off it went, you know?
Getting a school to keep it to a page has, I feel miserably.
Yeah, but I mean, she's got the cut and paste power to do whatever she wants, you know? It comes up with 2 pages, but I think. And there's an initial enthusiasm that will wane. But it is just too good information not to have out there in everybody's face.
It should at least go to parents. I think that I get something from my high school every week. And I hear there's a newsletter, but because it's not sent to me, I don't go and read it. And I don't seek it out. And so I'm like, you can skip over an email. You don't have to read it, but if it actually is something that's routine and comes every, week or once a month, at least to that group of people, I think it is really good. So.
Weekly will be more digestible than the monthly, as this is coming together, at least for this first month, and the enthusiasm may wane. The document that will be a monthly document is probably going to be 15 pages at least.
Yeah, I think
So
most
it'd be-
people don't on that one.
Well, at least whatever school is writing should go, whatever blurb that was, should always go also to those parents. And anytime there's
Yeah.
coming from, like, I get the district stuff and I get the, special ed or different things like at Mount Abe, but if it's about Mount Abe, send it to all Mount Abe parents. If it's about Beaman, send it to all the Beaman parents too, like, kind of just at least include that bit of owners.
So. To be continued.
Thank you.
We want to get Isabel on our report, yes,
Oh,
I'm not sure, because it was
You
on the.
should be
last-
getting all board emails. at
I
this point,
am.
I think, right?
Yes. You're getting these superintendent reports. That's exciting, because that would be really helpful, I think. 'Cause maybe even the community engagement committee could submit a piece for their principal or something, right? I mean, not, no, sorry,
Community council.
yeah, community council, right? Maybe they could even have a role. Piece for that, that would be neat about what you end up doing with that. or- yeah.
There were just a couple of other things related to reorganization and closing out this session. I don't know what to call it, term. And one is exit interviews. And so we had decided, I don't know when, that we wanted to start a practice of having exit interviews.
It was a result of a monitoring report.
Okay. And so a form was created.
Yeah.
And of the most recent ones that were distributed, 4 were distributed, only 1 was completed. So now we have Don and Chris who are exiting, and Don suggested we have the conversation. Is this the best way to seek what we're looking for, which I think is a better way to govern and make improvements in our work? Since the return was not so great with this form, we could instead have conversations with outgoing members in executive session. We could have their board partner, which theoretically we have partners that we're supposed to be connecting with. I don't know how often people are doing that, but we could have them, if executive session feels like overkill, we could have them connect with their board partner, or we could do the forum. But since we've got 2 folks here who are not going to be here in a couple weeks, we thought it was worth mentioning and seeing what people think.
I would defer to those 2 people to see how they wanna provide us with feedback.
And
I
moving
was-
forward, is that the idea? Then we would defer to folks.
Well, I'm
and
just
ask
thinking
them.
like there might be something that somebody wants to say in executive session, but there might be some stuff they just maybe want to tell their partner or maybe put in writing, not said, in public or in executive session. I don't know. So I think it depends on what kind of feedback they're wanting to give and how they want to give it.
is this feedback to help the person leaving have like, is the purpose to give us advice or to have closure, which is okay too, and or to have or are we looking for information, I guess?
I think it was identified as a way for us to gather more information on how well we're governing and working as a board.
Right.
Just kind of piggybacking on what Bailey said, I think maybe having 2 options available just for comfort level, for exact reasons that Bailey mentioned, I think would be ideal.
What do you think, Chris?
Don sent me the form, it's been a busy week or so since I got that. I took it to mean there was gonna be an executive session for us to discuss that. I'm happy to fill out the form if that's what you guys decided, because I haven't sent it back yet. It's not that I'm not going to, I just wasn't my impression. I thought it was just the questions you wanted to know.
Oh, and that only 1 out of 4 was not directed to you. I'm not calling you out.
That was before.
Yeah, no, I figured that, but I wanted to let you know that I'm happy to do that. So.
Not unwilling, and as we talked about it, planning the agenda, we talked about it gives you an opportunity to get a little deeper, because if we share something that raises a question with you, you can get a little more into it than on a piece of paper and I'm gone, kind of thing.
And does the paper form become part of the public record
No,
or would it?
no.
Yeah.
That could be.
That
We
might-
get
that's
none
gonna go
real
past
fast.
few of the information.
Please tell No, I think when we originally created it, we said that we would keep it confidential, just as any exit interview with staff or any member. If you want people to be honest with you, there's gotta be a certain level that you're gonna keep it private.
So we have it here now. We do have the option, I believe, to call an executive session to talk with them before they leave, or we can accept reports whenever they submit them to us. What do folks want to do? No, it would be either tonight or a form. Those are our two options for it.
I would move to go into executive session, because it sounds like it would save you time from even needing to do the form, right? And then someone, we could ask questions and engage, sounds like you'd be willing to do that, so.
But it would be like everybody willing to hang out. So if we do that, we would. We have a couple of other quick things to do, I think, but we would just do that and then adjourn.
So we could work through the rest of the agenda and add the executive session.
All right,
There were,
Uh,
so when were?
I
Oh,
think,
the board evaluation, you wanted a little guidance.
so I think we were also hoping at our reorg to have made a definitive plan for which evaluation tool we're going to be using. And we've kind of had fits and starts with the old one and the new one. Erin, you had some specific ideas about ways to improve.
We're just looking at the tool in general and making it cohesive. Instead of a mixed methods type thing, just if we're using it to get data to put into a report, it'd be easier to have one type of data. to put into it, in my opinion, the other people might not feel that way.
So we could share something at the reorg meeting and vote to adopt it, if that sounds good to everybody. And maybe we could even share it in advance. Would that be reasonable? That way, if people have other ideas. Okay,
Yeah.
When is the reorganization?
the
meeting?
14th. Yeah. Because we don't want to just assume that whatever we come up with is what we're gonna do, but it would be great to be able to adopt it that night. So maybe we could share it in advance if you have any other tweaking that you would like to see. And if not, we'll just assume you're good with that and then we'll use that. Okay, the only other thing I was thinking about with reorganization was, and I don't know if this relates at all to what you're talking about, Sarah's, but communication. Particularly emails from community members does get overwhelming. It's been the tradition for the chair to primarily respond to those. Sometimes there are a lot that come in. It's important for us to be on the same page with how we're responding to those, but it also can be a lot to respond to them in a timely manner sometimes. And so I don't have a particular answer, but maybe it's something we want to talk more about. I think some boards have like a more general board email, and then maybe it's something we rotate, taking turns monitoring and responding to at different points. I don't know what our policy says about who responds. If anything, in the policy says specifically the board chair is the one to respond to emails, but that might be one place where we can lighten the load.
Yeah, and then another place is around
Oh, the monitoring reports.
the
that's it.
monitoring.
That was the other one.
The monitoring report. So right now, the board, as the chair, I'm signing these, attaching the worksheets, scanning them into Jennifer, then before the superintendent evaluation, compiling them all and moving all the comments off the responses into the spreadsheet so everybody can see them. It would be great if somebody could take on the task of taking this slip, or taking these pieces of paper, getting them into that consolidated form where everything's captured and getting these to Jennifer, so then they can be posted on the Google Drive, you know, after Patrick signs them, kind of thing. So it's not a huge task, but it's just one
Governance.
more thing that has to be done when, you know,
Is
when
it
I'm,
possible to eliminate paper?
it is, she's
Okay.
got it, but Jennifer's got it on, online, so that you can sign it online. I just don't know where it is right now. I haven't found it.
Because if
But-
we could just direct people to write.
But
that
then you
way.
still have to get the worksheets attached, because oftentimes people submit the worksheets to the chair and then I would.
But if it's in a Google Doc, you could add sheets to that, right?
So,
So if
yeah.
it's all just electronic, that would make it like a lot easier.
yeah,
Or like link your own
Correct. Well-
thing that goes in there.
Or like a Google form.
Right.
Could populate a Google Doc on them. That's
That's
all in the
true.
right spot.
so, yeah, that may be, that was,
So we could fine tune that maybe,
Yes.
and then just
Fine.
direct people that have an blank form for each monitoring report.
yeah, usually, I mean, I don't put the blank ones in, I just put, yeah, people put their comments and that one gets included.
Okay.
But that's another little task that kind of adds to another piece of straw.
Yeah.
I almost think I would be more likely to do them if they came to me in a format. Is that, do you get what I'm saying? Like, that's
Yeah.
almost like, if
A
it's always like a
just
Google
populate.
form and it's like, is this the evidence, show it, yes, no, and then there's a, you know, a justification or a comment section right there and it goes in. Is that allowed?
So we won't have any monitoring reports at our reorg meeting. The next meeting is not until March 28th, and I wonder if someone might be interested in creating a new form we might use. And we can try it on the 28th.
It wouldn't be hard to just take the title of each section.
That's true.
Create.
What'd you say?
Former merger study committee person, the Google Doc wizard.
Oh,
No, I don't, I mean. I don't know if I can, but
so
Do you want to try?
I can try if I know it's supposed to be in it. Like in all the parts, so
if we get you all.
I might need Dawn's new email.
Sure,
this will be shut down.
Direct all comments here.
Right.
Tell your version of this.
Well, I just like, what are all the things that had to be in here, so it goes in? Okay, fine.
We'll get you guys.
So the consolidated document is already been shared with you. It's
Well,
so that spreadsheet is already
Okay.
there. You can see how it gets filled in and you would get it
This is a one-time job.
November.
Sarah didn't sign
well,
up for
to tell you,
for now.
no good deed goes unpunished.
Just say no, Sarah.
We'll make sure you get what you need to make an amazing Google experience
Okay,
from this. But the other thing that Don reminded me of at the monitoring report, also at the reorg meeting, we are gonna, no, that's not till the retreat. At the retreat, when we sign up for monitoring reports, we're strongly recommending that the board chair not sign up for monitoring.
And somebody's gonna have to
Oh,
take on.
yes. Don had one more.
I
to
had
do.
2 monitoring reports this
So-
year, so I did one, but the second one's.
We might pick out of a hat.
Yeah.
And do like a team approach to certain ones that are really, really big.
the team approach is actually super helpful. You
Mhm.
just crank it out and you don't feel like you're like doing
Yeah.
things that are uncomfortable, that people aren't gonna think about or not agree to, or you miss stuff.
Well,
I actually think it's
additional
better
eyes
anyway.
too. because- Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, so we'll go through a couple of other things here, and then we'll have an executive session and adjourn. So, our next item is public comment, and there's nobody. Oh, there's not.
Yep, we got two.
There's Chris, there's
Three.
a couple people online.
Yeah.
Is there any public comment at this time? No, it's.
This is
true.
the
No,
cursor.
it's the- no, it's the
Oh,
cursor.
sorry.
It does that to me every time.
Somebody's gonna talk.
All right. I'm not seeing any, okay. As Krista said earlier, the reorg meeting's is mostly done at this point. I mean, it's pretty packed. You're gonna be busy. And then the 28th has the stuff from the work plan on it and a few other things on the 28th.
So all the usual, well, we've got a bunch of monitoring reports, I think. And we were gonna talk about the superintendent updates.
Yep, and the central office location. An update on that. That was moved to that meeting.
Right. So. As part of that work group getting underway, Patrick and Floyd, we're gonna hopefully come and share some options with pros and cons for central office location. Oh, and we will also be having a executive session superintendent check-in. And we are gonna probably survey folks about some of the prioritizing some of the items in our parking lot. So if you're interested in what those are, elementary school choice, one, assessment 101 is another. Revisiting timing of monitoring reports and direct monitoring. Those are fairly broad, but those are the parking lot items as we have them right now. I think that's it.
So, meeting evaluation for tonight. You didn't pick somebody to sort of watch us as we went along, so do we just want to fill out the old one? What do you want to do?
Let's do that. I'll
Yeah,
pull it
okay.
up. What is the level of engagement of all board members? High or low?
Hi.
Does the agenda follow?
Yes.
Does the chair effectively establish the agenda and materials for distribution to the board?
Yes.
Is the chair effective in fostering a professional culture regarding fair and open deliberation, full participation of all members, and ensuring the integrity of the board process? Yes or no?
Yes.
Any comments? Any of these? Feel free. Other feedback for the chair?
Great job.
Thank you.
Feel free to join us at public comment. Or go to bed.
Or say, tell everybody else to go to bed.
What went well with the meeting?
Relatively fast. We learned a lot about tuitioning students.
We thought it was less complicated.
What suggestions do you have for ways to improve for 2 minutes? It's time. Okay.
All right. Okay, so we did establish a need for an executive session and I believe it would be under 1 VSA 313A3, which is the appointment, employment, or evaluation of a public officer or employee, provided that the public body must make the final hiring or appointment decision and explain its reasons for the decision in open meeting. So I think that's our reasoning to go into executive session. It will require us to determine that talking about this subject in public session would put us at a disadvantage. So we need 2 motions, one for the disadvantage and one to go into. And I think we can probably let Vicky head out and Floyd and Izzy and Katrina. Patrick, you have to stay, I think.
Okay.
I'll make the motion that premature knowledge or would put the district at a disadvantage or
All right.
however worded that's supposed to go.
All right. Is there a second? Andy? Any discussion? Well, we might say that we may get to naming individuals and that really doesn't put the district in a good light if we're gonna be speaking about people who are here or have left. So it really would be better done with the executive session. So all those in favor of determining that speaking about this topic in public session would put us at a disadvantage, please say aye.
Aye.
All right,
Any opposed? Okay, and then, given that we've determined disadvantage, we need a motion to go into executive session and invite Patrick to join us under 1 VSA 313A3. Krista?
A second.
Krista? All right, all those in favor of going into executive session at 8:45, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Brad, will you be joining us in executive session?
yeah, if I can, I'm just returning from picking up my kids, so I'm in Starksboro and my connection is not the best. But I will.
Okay, we'll send an email then with a link.
We could
Okay.
probably, if you want to,
Oh, wait a
when
minute.
when Beth leaves and whomever D is leaves,
Oh, okay, we can just stay
we
here.
can stop recording and
Okay.
stay on here.
All right, so.
And
Brad,
if somebody
just
happens
stay-
to pop in because it's still a live link, we can stop it. Which is different,
Yeah.
but I don't expect that one.
All right.
Is
I'm gonna have to drop out like a minute. I'll probably have to drop out for a minute or so until I get up the hill to my house.
Okay,
No problem.